Welcome to the Mystery and History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. During World War II, not every punishment happened on the battlefield. Some appeared inside armies, prisons, camps, military courts, and even in the streets, revealing a darker side of discipline, fear, and revenge in wartime. In this video, you will discover 25 punishments so unusual and severe that they seem made up, but they were part of a period when governments and military commands used public humiliation, isolation, psychological pressure, and extreme measures as forms of control. Behind each case, there is a story of power, obedience, desperation, and survival. And by the end, you will see that these punishments do not only show the harshness of war, but also how far entire societies can go when humanity is left behind. The Stalag, known as the standing cell, was one of the harshest disciplinary measures used in concentration camps run by the Schutzstaffel. With about 14 square inches, these brick compartments built into bunker walls allowed up to 4 detainees to remain only in a standing position without enough room to sit or lie down. The confinement was applied after long days of forced labor, preventing proper rest for several nights and causing great physical and psychological strain. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Stalag was used against those who broke camp rules. After liberation, the Allies documented these cells as evidence of the inhuman conditions imposed by the German regime. Some remain preserved at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial, helping preserve the memory of the serious violations that occurred during that period. The Wehrmacht, the German army during World War II, had an official disciplinary measure in its regulations called Anbinden, which involved keeping soldiers held responsible for minor infractions tied to a tree, post, or fixed structure for up to 2 hours a day, over several days depending on the seriousness of the offense. The procedure followed a bureaucratic process, including forms and officer authorization, and was applied publicly in front of the unit as a coded form of discipline. Presented in military manuals as an alternative to harsher measures, Anbinden drew internal criticism because public exposure of a member could harm his confidence and loyalty. After the end of the conflict, Allied investigations described this practice as an example of the systematic disciplinary system that ran through the Wehrmacht, revealing tensions between maintaining order and its effects on the combatants themselves. In Japanese camps for prisoners during World War II in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, a frequent disciplinary measure was forced remaining in the seiza position, which required sitting with the legs folded under the thighs and the body resting on the heels, often for hours under intense sun. For Western men who were not used to the posture, the method caused strong discomfort within minutes and was applied collectively to control detainees. Anyone who could not keep the position or lost consciousness could receive additional measures, worsening health conditions already weakened by insufficient food. Medical reports from survivors recorded lasting effects on knees and ankles. During Allied investigations carried out after the conflict, dozens of commanders were held responsible for adopting this method as a disciplinary procedure. Prolonged kneeling shows the rigidity and institutionalized mistreatment in Japanese camps. The cooler at Stalag Luft III was a strict disciplinary measure and also became a symbol of resistance for Allied aviators held in that German camp during World War II. The concrete compartment, without heat and exposed to below freezing temperatures, was meant for detainees who had tried to escape, imposing reduced food, no reading materials, and social isolation for days or weeks. Among those who spent time there was Roger Bushell, a South African pilot and leader of the largest collective escape from the camp in 1944, an episode that inspired the film The Great Escape. Bushell endured long periods in the cooler before organizing the operation that came to symbolize the prisoners' perseverance. The space became an emblem among aviators, highlighting the determination of those who, even under very difficult conditions, continued to seek freedom and hope of returning home. The public rank stripping ceremonies carried out by the Wehrmacht and the Schutzstaffel were formal procedures meant to expose soldiers accused of insubordination or abandoning their duties. In these events, those held responsible were forced to walk in front of their colleagues while their insignia and buttons were removed, also carrying a card that stated the infraction attributed to them. Officers and members of the unit had to watch the ceremony, reinforcing discipline through a strict public example. The procedure sought not only to hold the individual responsible, but also to warn other members about the consequences of violating military rules. After the conflict, Allied investigators noted that these ceremonies produced strong emotional effects and were described by survivors as especially difficult experiences. The accounts reveal the degree of social and disciplinary control maintained inside the German armed forces during that period. The Kempeitai, the Japanese military police during World War II, used an interrogation method known as water treatment, in which detainees were forced to take in large amounts of water through funnels or tubes, creating strong pressure inside the body. Interrogators then applied pressure to the abdominal area, producing serious physical effects without easily visible external signs and creating an intense feeling of being unable to breathe. The procedure was widely reported by members of Allied forces captured in the Pacific Theater and received attention during the Tokyo Tribunal, which began in 1946, when several Kempeitai officers were tried for systematic mistreatment of prisoners. The documentation presented showed that these practices were not isolated events, but part of institutional methods used by the Japanese military police, revealing the serious violations committed during the conflict. The strappado was an interrogation method used by the Gestapo and the Schutzstaffel, in which the detainee's arms were restrained behind the back before the person was lifted, causing body weight to concentrate on the shoulders in an extremely uncomfortable position. In a short time, the procedure caused intense strain and, when prolonged, could cause permanent physical limitations. Hundreds of testimonies from survivors of prisons controlled by the regime confirmed the systematic use of this method in different regions of occupied Europe, often applied even before questioning began to intimidate detainees. The procedure was presented at the Nuremberg trials as an example of inhuman treatment incompatible with international standards. These records contributed to the Geneva Convention of 1949, which reinforced the ban on interrogation methods capable of causing severe physical or psychological harm. During World War II, Germany implemented one of the strictest military laws in history, the statute known as Wehrkraftzersetzer, which established the maximum punishment for any act considered harmful to the military effort. Under this law, criticism, doubts about victory, or even pessimistic comments could be turned into extremely serious accusations, a situation unusual even among modern armies. Josef Schopf, a carpenter, received the maximum sentence after saying during a dinner that Germany was losing, while Richard Langes, a soldier, was held responsible for expressing skepticism in a personal letter. Thousands of people went through quick trials in special courts called Sondergerichte between 1939 and 1945, which issued between 15,000 and 20,000 maximum sentences for alleged actions against military morale, revealing the atmosphere of intense political and disciplinary control maintained by the regime until the end of the conflict. Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union during the World War II, signed Order No. 227 in August 1942, known as Not One Step Back, a drastic measure created to stop Soviet troops from retreating in the face of the German advance. The directive created the Zagrado Triadi, detachments of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs placed behind combat lines and authorized to stop retreats not approved by command. The order reflected strict Soviet military discipline at a critical moment, tightening control over its own forces to prevent defensive positions from collapsing. Official records state that more than 150,000 soldiers were sent to penal battalions between 1942 and 1945, although figures related to the actions of blocking detachments remain debated. The measure stayed in effect until the end of 1944 and represents one of the most controversial aspects of the Soviet military effort, whose scale was only officially acknowledged after the end of the Soviet Union. During World War II, the Soviet Union implemented penal units known as Strafbat, created by Order No. 227 in 1942. Soldiers accused of insubordination, abandoning positions, or other infractions were sent to these battalions and assigned to high-risk operations, such as advancing against fortified positions, crossing areas with hidden explosives, or defending points exposed to strong German offensives. The chances of returning from these missions were low, and many members remained in the units for only a few weeks. The official idea was to allow the soldier to restore his status through field service, with release possible after being removed because of physical problems acquired during operations. Records indicate that about 65 battalions and 1,300 penal companies operated until 1945, showing how these soldiers were used in some of the riskiest tasks of Soviet strategy. During World War II, Benito Mussolini authorized the reintroduction of decimation, an ancient Roman practice that applied the maximum punishment to one member of every group of 10 as a collective measure for insubordination or abandoning a position. The order was used mainly from 1942 onward, when Italian forces faced difficulties on the Eastern Front. Although the official order called for a drawing to select those held responsible, records indicate that some generals directly chose those considered more involved, increasing the arbitrary nature of the measure. In 2014, the Italian Senate recognized that more than 750 service members received maximum sentences from military courts, many of them affected by collective decisions. Decimation is an example of one of the strictest forms of control applied against combatants themselves, reflecting the tensions of the fascist regime in the face of military setbacks and leaving a negative mark on the memory of the 20th century Italian armed forces. Eddie Slovik, a young American soldier from Detroit, became known as the only member of the United States Armed Forces to receive the maximum sentence for desertion during World War II. In September 1944, afraid to return to combat areas and having a criminal record, he left his unit in France and later turned himself in, believing he would remain detained for the rest of the conflict. General Dwight Eisenhower, facing rising desertions after the Battle of the Bulge, decided to make his case a disciplinary example. On January 31, 1945, only a few weeks before operations in Europe ended, the sentence was carried out in Sainte-Marie-aux-Mines when Slovik was 24 years old. Although more than 21,000 service members were held responsible for desertion, only he received this measure, which had not been applied since the Civil War. His case remained little known until 1954, when journalist William Bradford Huey revealed it, sparking debates about justice, military discipline, and humanity. After the failed Allied operation at Dieppe in August 1942, more than 1,900 Canadian soldiers were detained by German forces, triggering a crisis over the treatment of prisoners during World War II. In response to alleged violations of the Geneva Conventions, especially the use of restraints on German members, the High Command ordered that the Canadians remain with their wrists restrained for long periods each day. The measure lasted from October 1942 to November 1943 and affected more than 1,300 men. The decision created a diplomatic standoff as Canada adopted an equivalent measure against German prisoners, increasing international tensions. The intervention of the International Red Cross was essential in pressing for the practice to be suspended. The episode shows the difficulty of ensuring respect for international law and the harsh conditions faced by detainees in the Western theater of the conflict. The use of the so-called cat-o'-nine-tails by the British Navy reveals a strict and outdated side of the British military and prison disciplinary system. The instrument, made up of several leather strips, had been widely restricted since the 19th century, but disciplinary measures of this kind remained legally allowed in some contexts until 1948. During the conflict, reports mention its use against detainees accused of serious offenses and against members of the British Empire subjected to military trials in colonial territories. The procedures followed formal protocols, including the presence of health professionals and previously established limits to prevent excesses. The practice reflected the authorities' effort to preserve discipline despite the social and legal changes of the time. Its final abolition in British prisons came with the Criminal Justice Act of 1948, gradually ending the use of physical measures in the official disciplinary system. In 1944, the Soviet advance against Germany was symbolized in the streets of Moscow by a public march later known as the Parade of Shame, in which about 57,000 captured German soldiers passed through the central streets of the Soviet capital. The demonstration, organized by Soviet leadership, aimed to expose the detained members and serve as propaganda for the triumph of the Red Army before the population. The scene reflected the atmosphere of strong tension in the final years of the conflict, marked by resentment and by an extremely strict interpretation of responsibility, even if incompatible with international principles of dignity. Moscow's streets, lined with silent spectators, witnessed a demonstration of the new European political and military balance. The episode shows the limits between victory, propaganda, and human respect, reminding us of the complexities involved in the treatment of soldiers after major confrontations. After Europe's liberation in World War II, a controversial practice spread through France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The so-called public tonte of women accused of collaborating with German occupiers, especially those who had relationships with foreign soldiers. About 20,000 women had their hair removed during public ceremonies, watched by crowds and improvised committees, often without investigation or formal trial. The procedure mixed popular accountability and personal score settling, with accusations often influenced by personal rivalries. Simone de Beauvoir was among the voices critical of this unequal treatment, noting that many women were publicly exposed, while many men involved in collaboration faced no similar consequences. The tonte symbolizes a complex gender dimension in the period after the conflict, revealing social tensions tied to memory, morality, and collective accountability in 20th century Europe. Sippenhaft was a repressive measure applied by Germany that held not only people accused of betrayal or disloyalty responsible, but also their family members. The policy became especially known after the attempt against Hitler on July 20, 1944, when spouses, children, siblings, and other relatives of those involved were detained and sent to institutions controlled by the regime. Many children were separated from their families and placed in locations where they received different identities in an attempt to erase their original ties. Created to intimidate the population and prevent resistance movements, Sippenhaft applied strong psychological pressure by extending the consequences of accusations to people who had no involvement in the events. After the end of the conflict, this type of family responsibility was expressly rejected by international rules, becoming one of the main historical examples of a collective measure forbidden by modern humanitarian law. During the German occupation of Poland, a strict policy of collective responsibility was implemented to contain local resistance, becoming one of the gravest chapters of that period. Authorities issued orders that determined measures against dozens of civilians for each German member affected in guerrilla actions, keeping residents detained in advance to ensure these reprisals could be carried out. The system was run bureaucratically. Localities associated with resistance could be evacuated, damaged, and have their inhabitants sent to forced labor camps. One example occurred in December 1939 in the village of WWII near Warsaw, when 107 men were taken from their homes and received the maximum punishment after an incident involving 2 German soldiers. The case later became part of the accusations presented at the Nuremberg trials. This institutionalized policy shows the regime's repression and the serious consequences endured by civilian populations during the occupation. The Night and Fog Decree, signed by the German leader in December 1941, was one of the German regime's most repressive measures against opponents in occupied territories. The order stated that people considered threats were to be secretly transferred to Germany, leaving their families and governments with no information about where they were. The name refers to Wagner's opera, symbolizing the quiet and shadowy way these people were removed from their communities, without public trials or confirmation of their situation. This lack of information was intentional and kept relatives in a long and painful uncertainty. After the conflict, many families never learned the fate of their loved ones, making the decree a historical precedent for forced disappearances later addressed by international law. The Nuremberg Tribunal classified Night and Fog as a crime against humanity, showing the regime's repression and influencing the development of international humanitarian rules. The hypothermia experiments conducted at the Dachau concentration camp starting in 1942 are among the most serious medical violations committed by the German regime. Led by Schutzstaffel Dr. Sigmund Rascher, they aimed to study the effects of severe cold on Soviet detainees and other inmates subjected to icy water or extremely cold environments without any consent. More than 300 people were included in these experiments, and many did not survive the imposed conditions. The results were sent to Heinrich Himmler, head of the Schutzstaffel, showing the link between pseudoscientific research and the German repressive system. In the Nuremberg doctors' trial, held between 1946 and 1947, these experiments were presented as central evidence and resulted in severe sentences against several people involved. The episode directly contributed to the creation of the Nuremberg Code, which established international principles of consent and ethics in medical research. During World War II in the Pacific, Japanese forces sometimes used white flags, the traditional symbol of surrender, to draw Allied members into ambush situations. Reports of this kind appeared in operations such as Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and the Philippines, where soldiers who approached to receive groups that seemed to be surrendering were surprised by renewed military actions. Allied documents recorded the use of these signals as a form of deception and tactical advantage. Repeated episodes increased distrust among combatants and made accepting surrenders harder in the final phases of the conflict. Beyond the immediate consequences, uncertainty about whether the flags were genuine produced strong psychological effects and serious dilemmas for the military personnel involved. These records show how deception strategies undermined traditional codes of conduct and increased tension in the Pacific theater. During World War II, Japanese soldiers practiced tameshigiri, a traditional technique used to evaluate sharpness and skill in handling the katana, the sword associated with samurai. The activity involved precise movements on materials placed before an officer and was used both for training and to show skill and military authority. Carried out in occupied Asian zones, the practice created tense and controversial situations because beyond its technical aspect, it could function as a form of intimidation and display of power in the harsh environment of the conflict. Visual records produced for internal documentation were later analyzed in investigations related to the conduct of the Japanese Army. The concentration of the participants and the emphasis on the swords confirm the symbolic and practical importance of tameshigiri, a ritual that brought an ancient tradition close to the military needs of the 20th century. The account that young Schutzstaffel recruits were forced to permanently separate from dogs they had raised for months became a symbol of emotional desensitization methods associated with the German regime during World War II. Under the influence of Heinrich Himmler, leader of the Schutzstaffel, these practices were said to aim at reducing emotional bonds considered incompatible with ideological discipline and preparing recruits for the psychological demands of the conflict. Young people connected to regime organizations received animals as puppies, forming an emotional bond that would later be broken as proof of absolute obedience. Although the extent and regularity of this practice are debated and varied by region or unit, later testimonies contributed to its spread. The episode is presented as an example of how the regime used methods of emotional conditioning and moral detachment to form members totally subordinated to German ideology. During World War II, there are records of prisoners being used to locate areas with landmines, a practice that shows the level of dehumanization reached by the conflict. These men, usually captured soldiers or detained civilians, were forced to walk ahead of military columns to identify and remove hidden devices, facing an extremely high risk of serious consequences. The black and white photograph, typical of the 1940s, shows old uniforms and dry terrain, pointing to operations carried out in open fields or on roads, possibly in Europe or the Pacific. The tense expressions of the detainees and the presence of guards show the constant fear of those used as involuntary protection in an extremely harsh strategy. The practice represents a serious violation of human rights and standards for the treatment of prisoners, reinforcing the importance of preserving the memory of these events and preventing similar methods from ever being used again. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.